Right, hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I am your host Jade Black and today I'm back with another episode of Ventures Elsewhere Reviews, the spoiler-free book review show. Pleased to say, another indie book and another ARC at that. This is a very hot release, very recent release. This is Those Who Breathe the Water by N.B. Clark. This is an adult horror. Goodreads says this is 117 pages, which doesn't tally with my reading software at all, but if you've been here before, you know that doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's just wildly different this time. In any case, it's sort of short novella length, easy to one sitting. This book, I think I read it in a few hours. This is from RDG Books Press, and I read the ebook for this one. If you've been around here before, you know the drill by now. I like to give my overall impression of a book in 3 words. This one I would say is classic, it's grounded, and it's cinematic, though not in the sense I'd usually use that word. We'll start, as always, with our characters. This book has quite a big cast, but not very many major characters. So our main character, our POV character, is Caroline. She's sort of an interesting character to follow in the sense of we don't really know what she is like ordinarily, in the sense that the entire time that we see her in this book, she's being affected by what is essentially crippling fear. Because the premise of the book, this is not spoiler territory, this is like on the back of the book, is that she's returning to a place where she once had a horrific experience. So we don't really see her without that lens, without that affecting how she behaves, who she is as a character. So, you know, there's a lot of fear and borderline, if not outright, paranoia eating at her at various points, but it doesn't really stop her from being brave, and that's outside of a sort of main quest version of being brave. Obviously there's bravery involved in that, but she is clearly a brave, courageous person anyway. That comes through very clearly, very quickly. She's also, question mark, a bit of a people pleaser. She doesn't want to bother anybody, she kind of just seems like she quietly wants to get on with her life. There aren't really too many other characters that get that much page time. The one we meet first out of the other 2 I'm going to talk about is Rachel. And Rachel is a very close friend of Caroline, though relatively recent friend, but very close. And Rachel just seems like a solid, good person, to be honest. She's kind, she can keep her mouth shut when she needs to, which is more than some of the other people in this book. And I think in many ways kind of an odd trait for a main character in a horror like this. That's something that doesn't seem to come up that often in a lot of more classic feeling horror, so that's interesting. But Rachel doesn't get a whole lot of page time, so there isn't a ton to say around her other than kind, solid, decent person. And then we have Dr. Strong, who is this old man, retired dentist. He comes across as very poised, very controlled, very calm. It's not apathetic exactly how he comes across, just sort of that unflappable, been there, done that sort of calm. There's not a lot I can say about him without spoilers, though. I mean, pacing-wise, this book really excels. I can't fault this. It's a very tight pacing, it's exactly as long as it needs to be, no more, no less. There are some flashbacks that are sort of put in there, especially in the earlier chapters, but they're handled nicely. I mean, I think I have talked about this, maybe not on the reviews show, but on the sister podcast. I've talked about how flashbacks can really drag down stories, and as soon as I see flashbacks, I go, just because I have come across so few cases where they're actually used well, and with good reason. Glad to say this is one of those. These are well-used flashbacks, and I think that's quite notable in a story that is this short, that's not dual timeline. Quality of the writing as well, it's pretty good. It's an easy read and is also evocative at the same time, so job done. It doesn't get bogged down in lots of description or purple prose or anything like that. It's not bare bones either. It's a nice happy medium. It's just fear is such a big part of Rachel's character and a lot of how the story works. It's some of the best written fear I've come across in a while, because it feels tangible, it feels a lot more real than a lot of fear usually does in horror books. It's not something I've really thought about very much before, because as an experienced horror reader, it's not that common to necessarily be scared by horror books, and I wouldn't say I was by this one, but you still get a tangible sense of the fear aspect anyway. And that's something that I do think some horror books lack, so props to the writer on this one. I usually like to dedicate a point to world building and lore as well. On this one, it's a very contemporary setting, so there's not a whole lot. Despite that, there's still a decent amount of time spent on the setting, and it does feel very real. It's set at I assume, fictional place called Osprey Lake. The descriptions of what will that look like, and that's all very nice, but it's the surrounding area, so the sorts of, rental cabins and stuff like that, and the inhabitants and exactly where all that's situated, and the size of them, and it's all very realistic, it's very naturalistic. That all felt very nicely done, handled with care, so that was neat, actually. Theme-wise, I've already touched on the main one of fear, and particularly overcoming fear is a very big part of this book. And it's another thing that it does feel handled very naturalistically, very realistically as well. This fear has been there for Caroline for a really long time, and it's not wanting to overcome fear because somebody's told you to. In fact, quite the opposite in this book. But just because it's so annoying and almost exhausting to just have it sat there the whole time, especially when you're trying to have a nice time with some friends. Naturally, what comes with that is, flashback memories and trauma and nightmares and all of that sort of stuff. That's again handled well, handled naturalistically, so I like that. There's also a loss of innocence happening, especially around the villain. It's the sort of theme that is there if you look for it. It doesn't smack you in the face with it. I like that dimension on top of overcoming fear, but actually maybe there's a good reason you have it. Not necessarily the origin of, but there is actually something there that should bother you. As you have probably guessed from everything I've said thus far, subtlety is a big thing in this book. There are a lot of little subtle details and things that build up to make a bigger picture. So there's one I wanted to highlight that doesn't give away a spoiler, and this is that there's just a drawer of fish hooks that's mentioned at one point. And you almost don't think anything of it at the time, but then when a reveal happens later, it just makes you put pieces together when that reveal happens. All the little details around certain people, certain places, certain things start to come together, form a more complete picture, and it starts to make a lot of sense. It's something that I imagine some readers could see as, this is a filler detail, but then when the reveal happens you realise it's really not. Actually, it tells a lot more story than you might think. The other one I really wanted to point out was how injuries are written. Caroline gets injured at a certain point in the book, and the way that's written about at the time and afterwards is far more realistic than... I'm trying to think of another book that has depicted those sorts of injuries that realistic that I've read. That's something that's so often overlooked, especially in horror. It's one of those things of, oh, but adrenaline, so you can run with a broken ankle or stuff like that, and no, you can't. Even just like the lasting implications of having a severe injury, stuff like that is properly accounted for in this book, and I appreciate that. I mentioned this book being cinematic, but in an unusual way, in the sense that this book doesn't have lots of super cinematic framing or anything like that. There's some atmospheric rain, which I always love, but there isn't a ton of time spent on scenery description or the sort of stuff you'd usually think of when you think cinematic. It's not really in the prose so much. This is where the evocative quality of the writing comes in. And I think this is often what I mean by evocative, but you see it more in something like this, where in my head I can basically see a shot-for-shot film adaptation of this extraordinarily easily. This book would translate to film so well, so easily, you would have to change basically nothing. You could just make a solid horror film out of this basically just by looking at the page. You would hardly even need a screenplay for it. And I think it's rare to have that exactly like that. Like, there are moments in Guy Fawkes' Demon Hunter, and I am bringing this up for a reason that I'll come back to. There are moments in Guy Fawkes' Demon Hunter where it's super cinematic, you can see how it would look in a film. I mean, I have this with many books, but Guy Fawkes' Demon Hunter does have quite long stretches that are quite cinematic, and then other stretches where it's less clear how that would work and how exactly it would translate. This book doesn't have that. This is much closer to something like Blink and Abernathy. I think is the only other experience I've had like this, where I read something and just go, yeah, make this a film, make this a TV series, in the case of Blink and Abernathy, because it would have to be a bit longer, it's just a bit longer. But honestly, something like that is just, it's begging for a screen adaptation. It would be so easy, it would work so well. I think it also comes so naturally to something like this because it's such a classic horror. The premise, the setup, why the characters are where they are, and the setting, everything lines up in a very classic horror sense. If you love classic horror, get this book. Honestly, just go to the description and go buy it right now. If you like classic horror, you'll love this. I do have a few favourite moments, but there are quite a lot of those that are spoilers, so I'm having to limit this to just two, sadly. One of which I've already talked about, really, which is the first scene post-injury. I think that's the one scene I thought, okay, this is done really well. Like, the details are really being paid attention to in this book. And I always appreciate that. I mean, it's something that I find indie writers tend to do a bit better. Hot take, question mark, but this writer in particular, N.B. Clark, does a very good job with detail, and I very much appreciate that. Also, the confrontation, the big confrontation with, oh, so it's you then. That's a really well written scene, and it's another one of those very evocative, very well written, very tense, but very quiet scenes, and I like a quiet horror. I love quiet horror. I wouldn't class this book as quiet horror, but this is absolutely a quiet horror moment, and I absolutely loved it. And scenes like that are such a linchpin that for it to be in the favourite moments list, especially when I try and do the show without spoilers, props to the writer. Art-inspiring moments aren't actually the same. Usually they kind of are. In this case, it's not. All of the sort of landscape, the setting, all of that sort of stuff. I like lakes. I like bodies of water. And I like autumn scenery. So that's just such an obvious one to me of, look at this idyllic lake where horrors happen. Also, the workshop. The workshop is a really interesting location. There's a lot of detail there, and all the sorts of things. I like a cluttered space, and this is definitely an artist thing. It's concept art, it's designing a space, environment design, all of that stuff. I really like that. As soon as you get a well-designed, complex, very personal, very detailed environment, I really like stuff like that. I mean, you might be able to tell because I've got my miniatures on my shelf, and that's exactly the sort of vibe you get with those. I mentioned the atmospheric rain. That sequence is great, and because the book is already so cinematic, again, it basically puts itself on a canvas. So, you might think that rating this book is incredibly obvious. The main issue that I take with this book is that when I closed it, I just closed it. And that might not sound like anything, really. You might think, well, yeah, you close a file, big deal. But when it comes to a really good book, there's something in me that's reluctant to close it. I want to keep staring at the back pages and thinking about it. But I just didn't have that with this one, and then I immediately start thinking about that instead. Why is this book so easy to put down? And this might be a selling point for somebody, but that's not what I necessarily want. I want to think about something, and yes, there are themes and details that all come together nicely, and it forms a very nice picture, but there's not enough left unsaid, for me personally. And this is why I bring up something like Guy Fawkes' Demon Hunter. Because Guy Fawkes' Demon Hunter, I mean, you can tell from the name if you haven't read it, it's not trying to be clever, necessarily. It's not meant to be profound, it's meant to be entertaining, it's meant to... It has a bit of a classic horror feel. You know, it has your big monsters and big horror fight scenes and lots of gore, and it's at points kind of over the top, and it has the cinematic moments, and characters don't always make the best decisions, it's the one that's the most entertaining in the fight sequence. And they don't necessarily say the best thing, it's the thing that's the most entertaining. The difference here for me is that Guy Fawkes' Demon Hunter also does have a genuine core of injustice and political dissatisfaction, and there are uncomfortable questions asked that don't always have a great solution. And there are things that are left unsaid, and yes, there are pieces that are put together, but you still end up wondering what happened in the middle. Like, the phrase "a unique selling point" has become a really trite marketing thing, but it is also important. There's no wow factor for me. The answer to that, to me, says actually maybe I'm just not the target audience. Strictly. Don't get me wrong, had a great time. This is a 4-star read, without a doubt, but there's nothing that elevates it past just, yeah, good time. Maybe that's what you want. If it is, link in the description to get this one. This is a very new release, and also the cover's great, by the way, so this will look great on your shelf. But if you are a fellow writer, you have an ARC you want to send my way, there is a cheat sheet at the very end of the video that will tell you 95% of what you need to know. So you can check that out. I am quite picky about what I'll take, so bear that in mind. There is also a full information video, I believe that's in the description, and there's an inquiry form in the description, or you can just email me, either works. That is all for this book and for now. So until next time, happy reading.